All right. Hello. It is good to be with you on this Friday where we're going to talk about vulnerability and what vulnerability has to do with growth. If you didn't notice in my title, it's a play on what's love got to do with it, which love has to do with everything if we allow it. So if you are joining live, please say hello. And if you are catching the replay, also say hello. I want to know that you joined me. If we have not met in person, my name is Ashley DePaulis, and I support high-achieving women who they're badasses. And they really make work and doing the work a priority at the expense many times of their bodies, their life, and their relationships. And I really help support them in moving from existing in their minds to coming fully alive in their bodies, which is why I wanted to talk about vulnerability today, because there was a time in my life that, and maybe you relate to this, that hearing the word vulnerability, I was just like, ew. Like, who wants to do that? That sounds terrible. That sounds like I'm gonna have to have this deep emotional conversation where everyone is like feeling their feels, and I don't even wanna deal with that. And it's just so funny, yet not funny, that now I am very much a proponent of feeling your feelings, and there's a reason why this is, and being vulnerable, and how leaning into our vulnerability really is a strength. And I'm sure you've heard that before, if not felt it and experienced it in your life. But when we lean into our vulnerability, it allows us not to only connect with ourselves more deeply, but connect with others, which is why we're all here. We're here to connect, we're here to love, we're here to support. We're not meant to be doing this alone. And you know, that me that I spoke to of not wanting to be vulnerable I was really coming from a place, or operating from a place of being tough and strong and doing it all on my own, which the women that I support, I see experiencing that as well, and the effect that it's having on their lives. So my own learning of this came through trauma and healing my trauma and learning the value in vulnerability, and you know, shifting a lot of the work that I did around trauma. I mean, I've done all different kinds of things to heal that trauma that lives in your body. And once it's released, it allows you to have greater capacity and energy for, you know, exploring who you are. It comes from a place of growth when you're in trauma, and trauma is like running your life. And for me, for a long time, I didn't know that was the case. But when you're operating from that place, it's just a lot of stress, and there's not a lot of room for growth. But when your body is freed of that energy, that trauma energy living within, then you have the capacity to learn and grow and experience life in a whole different way. I can tell you from all the work I did on work, and not all of it was like this hard work, as it may sound, but I have a completely new nervous system. A whole new operating system, a whole new, like a truer version of me. It's not like what I expressed before was bad, wrong, or not me, but I've been able to get in touch with like the authentic me and all versions of me, and what different experiences have taught me along the way. And that's part of being vulnerable and leaning into that and accepting it and loving it as part of, you know, where you are today. It doesn't necessarily have to be an identity of who you are today. I would actually encourage that it not become a full identity of who you are today, but it's part of who you are. So That's kind of where I'm coming from now. And in that process, I've really shifted how I show up in my work, in my business, in the way that I'm supporting others. I started my business largely around fitness training, personal training, health coaching, and although there are some aspects of that that are with me today, a lot of it I've allowed to fall away, and that has been I've seen where I've attached my identity to it strongly, and I'm sharing this with you so you understand, like, oh, maybe that's why I'm doing this in my life, even though I want to let something go, why I'm having a hard time letting it go, because our identity can be attached to it so strongly, and we don't know who we are without it. So, really making this shift, this growth, this evolution within my business has created space for me to share with those I support in a whole new way. And it's been really fascinating to see how my experience aligns with what my clients' experience is. And that's even down to, and this one fascinates me the most, of, since the people I work with are very high achieving and are very focused on their goals and their growth and their healing, that a lot of times in that shift, and Rachel and I have been talking about this more and more on our podcast, #relatable. If you have not caught it, definitely go catch it. This week's episode is getting rave reviews. The link is in my bio, so definitely check it out. But we've been talking about how capitalism and the patriarchy gets internalized in our body, and how it's a stress disorder. There's even a book written about patriarchy stress disorder, which is a play on post-traumatic stress disorder. And none of what I'm speaking to about capitalism or patriarchy, I'm not saying men are bad. I'm not saying capitalism is bad. That's not the point of this here. It's that these systems that we're seeing in society being dismantled as they are, where that is actually living and breathing within our own system. And if we want to change the world and change how we experience the world, then we have to change our operating system. And I spoke to how, as I was healing trauma, my operating system completely changed. So we have to go within to heal these things. And some of what that is feeling guilty for resting. I've had so many clients that feel they wonder why their energy is depleted. Well, they don't rest, and they don't allow themselves to rest and recover. So that's one in an operating system that we've been conditioned to live and work in that is not serving our nature, our human nature, our human being. Taking placing value, placing our self-worth within our identity. And that identity is usually in the form of the work that we do. I mean, anytime you meet somebody, and this completely drives me bonkers, but it just shows how deeply ingrained the conditioning is. When people first meet you, they're like, what's your name and what do you do? Who cares what we do? It's an interesting part of us, but is that really... That's how we identify people. Well, there's tons of other ways in which we can identify and relate to people. But we place so much value and worth in the work that we do. And that's really not serving our society at large and not serving us as individuals. Another idea of this is placing your productivity before your health. I know that we've all, even though I have always valued my health above all else, I have also very often placed my productivity before my health. Once I get these things done, then I can work out, or then I can eat, or then I can't tell you how many people, when I was explicitly working as a health coach, when I would work with people around nutrition, a lot of them didn't eat during the day. A lot of them maybe would eat in the morning and at night, but like throughout the day, you're not nourishing and fueling and taking care of yourself, yet you're expecting yourself to produce at this super high level. That is just not how things work. So anyways, I just want to read this comment. Love this. Exactly what I needed to hear today. Of course, Gina. Hey, Gina. I know you. Good to see you. So yeah, that's another way in which patriarchy, which capitalism gets internalized. Another one that I recently watched, Paris Hilton's documentary on YouTube about her experience with trauma. And she said this next one like over and over again. And this is coming from a woman who has everything, has wealth, she doesn't have to worry. Yet the way in which she's been conditioned to be and achieve and, with a lot with trauma, even though I'm not doing this whole episode about trauma, is this, you want to control things, because with trauma at a point in time, everything was out of control. So the more that you can control things, the better that you feel. And she even speaks to that in the documentary, but she says over and over, like, her sister will ask her, are you happy? And she's like, I'll be happy when I do X or when Y happens. So it's this idea that we can't be happy or can't experience joy until we produce or achieve something, which that's not the case. So a lot of times when we operate from that place, and I've heard many successful people speak to this, I've experienced it myself, a lot of times when we operate that way, that I'll be happy when I achieve this thing, when the achievement comes, we're like, oh, it's not what I expected. It's not as fulfilling as I thought. But when we allow ourselves to be fulfilled and experience joy along the journey, then when we achieve the thing, it's like that much more enjoyable, that much more fulfilling, and we feel good about it. So it's about nourishing yourself along the way, which we have not learned to do. Another one, which is huge, especially around, so when I speak patriarchy, I said, like, it's not like this is not about men, even though the white male with a lot of money has helped create these systems. So there is an aspect of that. But it's also where patriarchy in these ways are disempowering. So all these ways that I'm sharing are like disempowering forms of patriarchy, where there are also empowering forms. We just have to lean into those. So it's not that that it's all bad and wrong. It's noticing where we're operating and how to shift that. So this is a huge one, especially around, we can say patriarchy masculine, matriarchy feminine. So there's this idea for females and being in your feminine that when we rest, we're not safe there. And if we rest, that means we're lazy. And that could not be further from this truth. So leaning into the feminine, which is more about being than doing, which is the masculine. We need both to work together. We want them to work in an empowering, unified way together. So we tend to judge ourselves very harshly here, especially when we are experiencing pain, trauma, and adversity. It's like, oh, I need to get back to, being how I was before this thing happened, or I need to get back to my normal self. This is some of the conversation that comes up in the mind. And it's really not laziness at all when we're resting. That's not what it's about, unless you're, for whatever, consistently experiencing that fatigue and feeling lethargic. Like I would say, go to the doctor. But it's not that you're a lazy person or being lazy. We have to allow ourselves especially when we're going through pain, trauma, and adversity, to rest, to recover, to be in that season. Because sometimes it's a season, and it's not that you're actually probably you are gaining so much more. I'm not even going to say probably, from that rest than if you try to force yourself through something. It's always this idea of, I need to push myself through, and then it goes back to that same story. Then I will be happy. Then this will happen. And that could not be further from the truth. So the more that you can be where you are when you're there, like, that's very much more present moment living, which we also have not completely accepted in the patriarchal society. It's not a norm, but it is our nature. Then we would have a much easier time and much more capacity when we are faced with challenges. Like, a lot of times why we end up feeling overwhelmed and anxious or depressed when we experience challenges is because our system doesn't have the capacity to hold that at all. So I'll leave you with that on that one. The last one that I wanted to speak on is this idea of using busyness as a way to avoid what you actually need. And we've all been there. We've all done that. My phone rang. Whether you are experiencing this right now or can think of a time when you did experience this. So it's really easy when I was somebody, before I went through healing my trauma, I would pack my schedule, because if I knew I could be around people and be doing something, then that made me feel safe. I didn't have to feel how anxious I felt being alone. Like, I would always exhaust myself to rest, because my nervous system was such in a place where it could not be calm. And so that's why a lot of times we tend to busy ourselves to avoid facing what we need to face, because it feels big and scary and overwhelming. But the reason it feels big and scary and overwhelming is because your system is overstimulated or understimulated, and it just doesn't have the capacity in your linear mind and your human mind to decipher or discern what's actually going on and what you need. So if you're in any of these places, like, it actually feels really heavy for you. I mean, I think, like, you move in and out of these places in different cycles of life, and you can move through them more quickly as you heal your nervous system and find ways to regulate your nervous system. But if you are in a place of it feeling very heavy, the more that you can, in a way that makes it safe for you, like you feel safe and secure doing this, the more that you can look at either calling in support for yourself, whether that's a therapist, or, like, one big thing that I relied upon in the beginning of my journey, and it wasn't like a relied upon thing. It's called network spinal analysis. So it works on helping you regulate your nervous system. So any ways in which you can regulate your nervous system. The one thing I heavily relied upon was exercise, to the point where it did what it needed to do so that I could relax, but it was also unhealthy in that I didn't know I was doing this, but I was using it to become exhausted so that I could relax. So that I would say is not healthy. But breath work, meditation, any of those things that we're often resisting when we feel stressed and anxious are the things that you can look towards. So any type of support, I would say, and multiple types of support. Like, there's no one path to follow. You might have to try different things out to see what works for you. But the more that we can face and be vulnerable with the parts of ourselves that don't feel comfortable and need more attention. Often that's your inner child who is screaming out at you. Often it shows up as a judge, an inner critic that has a lot to say, especially when you're in pain. Facing that part and like starting a relationship and a rapport with it. You know, I was having a conversation with somebody just yesterday, and she was speaking to when she's in pain, how much judgment comes up. And I said, and she's done all these different types of things. And I asked, because I very much know that that's the case, I asked, like, have you created a rapport or relationship with this judge? And she's like, no. So like getting curious and compassionate is a way to be vulnerable with these parts of yourself that are speaking up, because they have a message. They have a message for you. It might not be a message that you even think. So there's no need to be scared of it, but looking towards that and how that can support you. And it's interesting, I was going to say this at the beginning, that, you know, between this masculine and feminine energy that we all carry within us, the big thing that I see with women that I work with, and I've even seen within myself, is on the right side of the body, which is considered our masculine, the left considered our feminine, that the right side of our body is so tense. And for women, that shows up a lot more around the hips, the glutes, and the lower back. And it's just so fascinating that, like, every time I meet a woman that like says that, I'm just like, oh my gosh. Because the experience that aligns with that a bit, there's not to say, you know, something structural isn't going on. Usually it is. Like my pelvis and my hip tends to be more shifted forward on that side when I'm experiencing that tension. So there can be relief structurally, but it's also, where are we having a hard time leaning into our feminine, leaning into our emotions, leaning into our vulnerability, because for a long time we haven't felt safe to do that. So we have to create that safety within the body, that support within the body, so that you can move forward in your life more, feeling more whole, feeling more complete. You already are that, but you may not feel that way. And the way to feel that way is to, you know, look at these particular areas and make shifts in these safe, small ways to create greater change, to create the growth, create the life that you really want. So Gina says, masculine can be very rigid. Yes, so rigid the body yes, the body goes along with it. Totally. And the masculine is meant to be more rigid and structured. The feminine is meant to be the visionary, so that masculine is there to support the feminine, but we're always leading, or what we've done for such a long time is lead with the structure. Like, I need to create this rigid structure and then box myself into it. And that's when the feminine is just like, ugh, I can't deal with this. I can't do this. I feel trapped. And that's when we're in a more disempowering relationship between the masculine and feminine, when we really want to call in a relationship between those energies that is more unified, more harmonious. So it's not about one or the other, it's both. And that is experienced in and through your body. So noticing how these things show up in the body, noticing how it shows up in your world, in your work, and how you can create these small shifts and movements to, because you can do this through movement, you can do this through breath, you can do this in many ways, to really embody your truth, to really have sovereignty over your life, to lead yourself in the way that is most supportive for you at the time. So I think that's all I have today. I don't know. That's just what came out, and it feels perfect, whole, and complete. So if you have any other comments or questions, and want to hear more about this, just let me know. You can drop it in the comments. I also want to let you guys, you're welcome. I'm so glad you were here, Gina. It's good to see you. Virtually, of course. But I also want to let anyone know who's watching that my program Vital Body is in open enrollment right now. We start October 12th and it is an 8-week program. I can share all the deets with you in the comments, but if you want to learn more about, creating more coherence between the body and the mind so that you can grow and expand in the way that you really want to, then definitely reach out and I'll share those deets with you, but I'll also put a link in the comments. So thank you, and I will talk to you soon. Bye for now.